The hegemony of aligned worlds had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once failed to conquer any species they had targeted. Their empire stretched across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, containing over 200 subjugated races who served their masters without question. The High Conclave, a council of the 7 eldest species who had founded the hegemony, made all decisions of importance, and on this particular day, they had gathered to discuss a new discovery that their scout fleets had made in a quiet corner of the Orion Spur. Ambassador Kethvoran stood before the conclave with his 4 arms folded behind his back as he presented his findings to the assembled counselors. "The species calls itself humanity," he said, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into the common tongue. "They are confined to a single star system, though they have begun to establish small colonies on nearby worlds." "How long have they been spacefaring?" asked High Counselor Methrix, the eldest member of the conclave. "Approximately 300 of their years," Kethvoran replied. A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled counselors, for 300 years was nothing, merely a blink in the long history of the galaxy. The hegemony had been traveling between stars when these humans were still living in caves and hitting each other with rocks. "They are noisy," Kethvoran continued. "They broadcast signals into space without any attempt at concealment, almost as if they want to be found." "Perhaps they are lonely," said Counselor Vethzara, her tentacles curling with interest. "They will not be lonely for long," Methrix declared with authority. "They will join the hegemony, willingly or otherwise." The decision was made in less than an hour, and it was unanimous. Humanity would be given a choice: submit peacefully and accept hegemony rule, or face the consequences that 37 species before them had faced. Ambassador Kethvoran was chosen to deliver the ultimatum, and he accepted this honor with pride. He traveled to Earth aboard a diplomatic vessel, accompanied by a small fleet of warships that hung in orbit around the blue planet as a reminder of hegemony power. The humans sent a delegation to meet him, led by a gray-haired woman named Secretary General Yuki Tanaka. Kethvoran studied her as she entered the meeting chamber aboard his ship, and he found her appearance quite unremarkable. She was small by hegemony standards, barely reaching his chest, and she lacked any natural weapons that he could see. No claws adorned her fingers, no venom glands bulged beneath her skin, and no armor plating protected her soft body. Her eyes were positioned at the front of her skull, like those of a predator, though he could not imagine what prey such a weak creature could possibly hunt. "Welcome aboard," Kethvoran said, spreading his arms in what his cultural advisors had told him was a gesture of greeting. "I am Ambassador Kethvoran of the hegemony of aligned worlds." "Secretary General Tanaka," the woman replied calmly. "I represent the United Nations of Earth." "I am not familiar with this organization," Kethvoran admitted. "It is the closest thing we have to a global government," Tanaka explained. "The nations of Earth have agreed to let me speak on their behalf in matters concerning contact with other species." Kethvoran found this very interesting indeed. The humans were divided then, split into competing factions rather than united under a single authority. This would make the conquest even easier than he had anticipated. "I will be direct with you," Kethvoran said. "The hegemony has observed your species for some time, and we have decided that you will join our empire." Tanaka's expression did not change at all. "I see," she said. "And what would this arrangement involve?" "You will surrender all military assets to the hegemony," Kethvoran explained. "Your governments will be dissolved and replaced with hegemony administrators who will manage your world and its resources efficiently." "And what about our people?" "They will be assigned roles based on their abilities," Kethvoran said. "Useful species are treated well under hegemony rule. Though I must be honest with you, Secretary General, because initial assessments suggest that humans are not particularly useful." "In what way are we not useful?" Tanaka asked. You are physically weak compared to most species we have encountered, Kethvorin explained. You have no natural weapons, limited sensory abilities, and a surprisingly fragile biology, and your technology is primitive by galactic standards. So you will likely be assigned to labor duties rather than technical positions. I understand, Tanaka said, her voice remaining perfectly calm. And if we refuse this arrangement? Kethvorin's translator flickered for a moment, uncertain how to convey his amusement at her question. He had delivered this ultimatum to dozens of species before, and this question always came. It was usually asked with a trembling voice by leaders who already knew the answer, but felt compelled to ask anyway. If you refuse, he said slowly, the hegemony will do what it has done to 37 species before you. And what exactly is that? We will assemble a fleet sufficient to overwhelm your defenses, Kethvorin said. We will destroy your warships such as they are, and we will bombard your colonies until they surrender. Is that all? No, that is not all, Kethvorin continued. After your military is destroyed, we will reduce your population to a manageable number. What do you mean by a manageable number? Tanaka asked. The hegemony has found that conquered species are most cooperative when their population is reduced by approximately 90%, Kethvorin explained matter-of-factly. The survivors tend to be more grateful for their lives and less inclined to cause trouble or rebellion. A long silence filled the chamber after these words. Tanaka looked at her advisors, who sat behind her with faces that Kethvorin could not read. Then she turned back to face him directly. Thank you for making our situation so clear, she said. May I have a moment to consult with my delegation? Of course, take all the time you need. Tanaka and her advisors spoke in low voices for several minutes while Kethvorin waited patiently. He was confident that he knew what their answer would be, because every species chose submission when faced with the reality of hegemony power. The smart ones did, anyway. The stupid ones chose war and were destroyed completely. Ambassador, Tanaka said finally, rising from her seat. You have reached a decision? We have, she said, and her voice was steady and strong. Humanity refuses your ultimatum. Kethvorin stared at her in genuine surprise. I do not think you understand the situation you are in, he said. I understand it perfectly well, Tanaka replied. You have told us that we will be enslaved if we submit and mostly killed if we refuse, so we choose to refuse. You will die in enormous numbers. Perhaps we will, Tanaka said, but we will die free, and that matters to us more than you can possibly understand. Kethvorin felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, and it took him a moment to recognize it as uncertainty. Very well, he said at last. I will inform the conclave of your decision, and they will set a date for your invasion. How long do we have before you come for us? 6 months, Kethvorin said. That should be sufficient time for the hegemony to assemble a fleet worthy of this occasion. Tanaka nodded slowly. Then I suggest you leave our system immediately, Ambassador, she said. We have work to do. Kethvorin watched as the human delegation departed his ship, and he felt troubled in a way he had never felt before. He had expected fear from them. He had expected panic. He had expected desperate attempts at negotiation. Instead, he had seen something else entirely, something he could not quite identify or understand. He reported to the conclave that humanity had chosen war, and the councilors received this news with great satisfaction. It had been too long since the hegemony had crushed a defiant species, and the military commanders were eager for a proper campaign. The invasion date was set for 6 standard months hence, which would give the hegemony time to assemble an armada of 4,000 warships and 16 million soldiers. It would be glorious, the councilors agreed. The war would last a decade, perhaps 2, long enough to be remembered in the histories, but short enough to be efficient. Then humanity would take their place among the conquered, and the galaxy would continue as it always had. None of them suspected that they had just made the worst mistake in 12,000 years of hegemony history. None of them understood what they had awakened in that small, fragile species. And by the time they realized their terrible error, it would be far, far too late to do anything about it. For the first week after the ultimatum was delivered, the hegemony's intelligence networks worked overtime to monitor every human activity they could detect. They intercepted thousands of communications, watched military movements across the solar system, and cataloged every ship that launched from Earth's surface. The humans were panicking, just as everyone had expected them to do. World leaders argued with each other in angry broadcasts. Military commanders issued conflicting orders to their forces, and the population seemed split between those who wanted to fight and those who wanted to surrender. Admiral Zethmara, who had been chosen to command the invasion fleet, reviewed the intelligence reports with great satisfaction. They are falling apart exactly as predicted, she told her officers during their daily briefing. Their so-called united government is crumbling under the pressure of our ultimatum, and by the time we arrive, they will barely be able to mount any kind of defense. Her subordinates agreed enthusiastically with her assessment. The humans were behaving exactly like every other doomed species the hegemony had ever conquered. There was nothing special about them at all. But then, at the end of the second week, something very strange happened. The communications stopped completely. One day, the hegemony's listening posts were flooded with intercepted transmissions from every corner of human space. And the next day, there was nothing but absolute silence. Admiral Zethmara assumed that the humans had finally accepted their fate and were simply waiting for the end to come. They have given up hope, she reported to the conclave with confidence. They know they cannot win against us, so they have stopped trying to organize any resistance. But not everyone in the fleet was convinced by this explanation. Junior analyst Pelix worked in the intelligence division of the invasion fleet, occupying a low-ranking position that involved processing raw data from sensor sweeps and listening posts. He was young by hegemony standards, barely 300 years old, and he had never seen actual combat in his entire career. But he was very good at his job, and something about the sudden human silence bothered him deeply. They did not go quiet gradually over time, he told his supervisor one morning. It happened all at once, across their entire civilization, as if someone flipped a switch. Perhaps their communications infrastructure failed? His supervisor suggested with a dismissive wave. All of it, at exactly the same time, across an entire solar system. Pelix asked. Primitive technology is unreliable. Everyone knows that. Pelix was not satisfied with this answer at all. He began running his own analysis during his off-duty hours, looking for any signals that might have escaped the communications blackout. What he found was even more disturbing than the silence itself. There were signals coming from human space, but they were unlike anything in the hegemony's databases. The frequencies were completely wrong. The encoding was utterly incomprehensible. And the quantum signatures suggested technologies that should not exist according to everything the hegemony knew about physics. He also noticed energy readings that made absolutely no sense. The sun at the center of the human system was outputting slightly less energy than it should, almost as if something was absorbing a fraction of its power. And there were gravitational anomalies near the outer planets, tiny fluctuations that suggested massive construction projects happening in places where no construction should be possible. Pelix brought his findings to his supervisor, who brought them to the intelligence chief, who brought them to Admiral Zethmara herself. What exactly am I looking at here? Zethmara demanded as she studied the data. We are not entirely certain, Admiral, the intelligence chief admitted nervously. But our analyst believes the humans may be developing new technologies at an unprecedented rate. "That is completely impossible," Zethmara declared. "They have been spacefaring for only 3 centuries, and they were barely capable of interplanetary travel when we found them. So how could they possibly develop advanced technology in just a few weeks?" "We do not know how, Admiral." Zethmara dismissed the concerns with a wave of her manipulator limbs. "The hegemony has cataloged every possible technology in the galaxy over 12,000 years," she said confidently. "We have more scientific knowledge at our disposal than any other civilization in existence. And there is absolutely nothing a primitive species could develop that we have not already seen and learned to counter." Pelix wanted to argue with her assessment, but he was far too junior to speak directly to the Admiral. Instead, he returned to his workstation and continued his analysis with growing concern. The more he looked at the data, the more worried he became. Human ships were disappearing from their normal locations throughout the solar system, but he could not find where they were going. Their colonies had gone completely dark. Their satellites had stopped transmitting any signals, and even their civilian traffic had vanished from all the sensor logs. It was as if the entire species had simply decided to hide from observation. But where could 8 billion people possibly hide? 3 months passed slowly, and the silence from human space continued without any break. Admiral Zethmara grew impatient with the lack of intelligence. She sent scout ships into human space, expecting to find a demoralized population waiting passively for conquest. The scout ships did not return. "Technical malfunction," Zethmara concluded after the first group vanished. Their ships were old and poorly maintained. She sent more scouts into the silent system. They did not return either. By the 4th month, Zethmara had lost 12 scout ships without any explanation, and still she refused to consider that something might be seriously wrong. "The humans are probably capturing them for intelligence purposes," she told the Conclave in her regular report. "It is a desperate move on their part, but completely understandable given their situation." "Should we accelerate the invasion timeline?" asked High Counselor Methrix with some concern. "That will not be necessary at all," Zethmara assured him. "We have overwhelming force at our disposal, and no species in the history of the galaxy has ever developed a defense against hegemony weapons." Pelix listened to these reports with growing dread in his heart. He had stopped sleeping properly, spending every available hour at his workstation running calculations and analyzing every piece of data he could find. The gravitational anomalies near the human planets were getting stronger every day. The energy readings were becoming more erratic and more powerful. And now there was something entirely new: quantum fluctuations near the human star that defied every known model of physics the hegemony possessed. He tried once more to warn his superiors about what he was seeing, but his concerns were dismissed again. The hegemony had conquered 37 species over 12,000 years, and not one of them had ever posed a real threat. Why would the 38th species be any different from all the others? On the night before the fleet was scheduled to depart for the invasion, Pelix made a difficult decision. He began downloading classified files to a personal storage device, sensor logs, intelligence reports, his own detailed analysis of the anomalies. If something went terribly wrong, if the invasion failed in some unimaginable way, someone would need to survive to learn from this mistake. He finished the download just as the departure alarm sounded throughout the ship. The great fleet began to move toward the jump point. 4,000 warships carrying 16 million soldiers, the largest armada assembled in over 1,000 years. Pelix watched from his station as the star stretched into lines and the fleet jumped into hyperspace. They would arrive in the human system in just 3 days. 3 days to reach their destination and begin the conquest. 3 days until glory, the officers said to each other with excitement. Pelix said nothing to anyone. He kept his storage device hidden carefully in his quarters and continued his analysis. hoping desperately that he was wrong about everything he had discovered. But deep in his gut, in the place where instinct lived, he knew the terrible truth. Something was waiting for them in that system. Something that the hegemony had never faced before in all its long history. And when they arrived, all of their assumptions about conquest and superiority and inevitable victory would be tested in ways they could not possibly imagine. The fleet flew on through hyperspace, carrying its soldiers toward what they believed would be another easy victory. None of them knew that they were flying toward the end of everything they had ever known. None of them suspected that the silence from human space had not been the sound of a species giving up. It had been the sound of a species preparing for war. The hegemony fleet translated out of hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system, and for a long moment there was only stunned silence on the bridge of the flagship. Admiral Zethmara stood at her command station, staring at the tactical display with an expression that none of her officers had ever seen on her face before. It was confusion mixed with something that might have been fear. "What am I looking at?" she whispered. Her sensor officer worked frantically at his console, running diagnostic after diagnostic and recalibrating all his instruments. "The readings appear to be accurate, Admiral," he said finally, his voice unsteady with shock. Zethmara had expected to find a solar system much like the one the scouts had originally surveyed 6 months ago. She had expected a handful of primitive space stations, some basic orbital defenses, and perhaps a few hundred warships of inferior design. Instead, she was looking at something that should not exist. Around Jupiter, the largest planet in the system, there hung structures of impossible size. Each one was larger than any space station the hegemony had ever built in 12,000 years of expansion. They were massive constructs of metal and energy that pulsed with power readings that went far beyond anything in the fleet's databases. Around Saturn, with its beautiful rings, there were even more of these enormous structures. These ones seemed to be actively harvesting material from the rings themselves, converting ice and rock into something that the sensors could not identify at all. And then there was the moon that orbited Earth. The gray satellite that had appeared in all the original survey images was simply gone. In its place was something else entirely, something that made Admiral Zethmara's blood run cold. The moon had been hollowed out and completely transformed. Its surface was now covered with weapons platforms and shield generators and landing bays, large enough to swallow a hegemony battleship whole. But none of this was even the most disturbing part of what the sensors were showing. The most disturbing part was what had happened to the sun. A partial shell had been constructed around the human star, a vast framework of collectors and transmission arrays that was drinking energy directly from the solar surface. The readings suggested that this impossible structure was harvesting more power every single second than the entire hegemony fleet could generate in an entire year. "That is simply not possible," Admiral Zethmara whispered to herself. "Admiral," her communications officer interrupted nervously, "we are receiving a transmission from the third planet. Put it through to the main display." The screen flickered, and suddenly Secretary General Yuki Tanaka was looking at them. She stood in a command center of some kind, surrounded by humans in military uniforms, and behind her was a window that showed Earth hanging beautifully in space. She looked older than she had 6 months ago. Zethmara noticed. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her gray hair had gone almost completely white. But she was smiling. "Admiral Zethmara," Tanaka said warmly, "welcome to our solar system." "What have you done here?" Zethmara demanded. "We prepared for your arrival," Tanaka replied simply. "This is absolutely impossible," Zethmara said, gesturing at the tactical display showing all the impossible structures. "You could not have built all of this in 6 months, not even in 600 years. You are quite right that we could not have built it under normal circumstances." Tanaka agreed, but these were not normal circumstances at all. She stepped aside, allowing the camera to pan across the bustling command center. Zethmora saw humans of every type working together in perfect coordination. Old and young, male and female, with skin of every shade and uniforms from a dozen different nations. "You gave us an ultimatum, Admiral," Tanaka continued. "You told us that we would be enslaved or destroyed, and you gave us 6 months to accept our fate. And you chose to die fighting instead of surrendering," Zethmora said. "I can respect that decision, but it will not save your species." "We did not choose to die at all," Tanaka said firmly. "We chose to live, and to do that, we had to change absolutely everything about how our species operates." She turned back to face the camera directly. "When your ambassador delivered his message, the nations of Earth were divided against each other," she explained. "We spent more energy fighting among ourselves than we ever spent solving our real problems. That is the way of all primitive species." "Perhaps it is," Tanaka acknowledged. "We have been doing this for our entire history, but your threat changed everything for us." "Changed it how exactly?" "It gave us a common enemy for the first time," Tanaka said. "For the first time in all of human history, we stopped seeing each other as rivals and started seeing each other as allies." She pulled up data on a display beside her. "Within 1 week of your ultimatum, every single nation on Earth had committed their entire scientific and industrial capacity to a single unified project," she said. "Every factory, every laboratory, every university, every engineer and scientist and worker on the planet, all of them focused on one goal. Survival," Zethmora said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Exactly right," Tanaka confirmed. "We called it Project Unity, and it accomplished in 6 months what would normally have taken us many centuries." "How is that even possible?" Zethmora asked, genuinely curious despite her growing unease. "We cheated," Tanaka said with a slight smile. "We took shortcuts that no sane civilization would ever take under normal circumstances." "What kind of shortcuts?" "We pushed technologies that we barely understood," Tanaka explained. "We accepted risks that would have been completely unthinkable under normal circumstances. And we worked ourselves to exhaustion every single day." She gestured toward the window behind her, showing Earth. "3 months ago, we had a breakthrough in physics that your species apparently never discovered," she said. "We learned how to manipulate gravity and energy at the quantum level. That should be impossible. We also learned how to move matter instantly across vast distances," Tanaka continued. "And we learned how to tap into energy sources that your databases say are only theoretical possibilities. Our databases contain 12,000 years of scientific knowledge," Zethmora said slowly, realization finally dawning on her. "And in those 12,000 years, you stopped looking for new discoveries," Tanaka said. "You had conquered every species you encountered. So you had no reason to innovate. No pressure to advance beyond what you already knew." She leaned forward with intensity. "We, on the other hand, have spent our entire existence under constant pressure," she said. "We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. And we survived by adapting faster than our environment could change. You are saying that the threat we posed made you stronger? I am saying that we are at our absolute best when we are at our absolute worst," Tanaka replied. "When everything is peaceful and safe, we fight each other over trivial things. But when something threatens all of us together, we become something much greater than the sum of our individual parts." Admiral Zethmora looked at the tactical display again with new eyes. The impossible structures around Jupiter and Saturn, the transformed moon bristling with weapons, the partially enclosed star drinking solar energy. All of it built in just 6 months by a species that had been traveling between worlds for barely 3 centuries. "You cannot possibly have weapons powerful enough to match these constructs," she said, but her voice lacked all conviction. Would you like to find out what we can do? Tanaka asked calmly. Zethmora considered her options very carefully. She had 4,000 warships and 16 million soldiers under her command. That was more than enough military force to conquer most species in the galaxy. But looking at the readings coming from those impossible human structures, she was no longer certain that superior numbers would matter at all. I am transmitting our tactical data to you now, Tanaka continued. It shows exactly what our defensive platforms are capable of doing. Zethmara's sensor officer went completely pale as the data appeared on his screen. Admiral, he said, his voice barely above a terrified whisper. If these readings are accurate, a single one of those platforms could destroy our entire fleet by itself. The readings are completely accurate, Tanaka confirmed. We have 57 such platforms positioned throughout our solar system, and the shell around our sun can focus energy equivalent to a supernova if we find it necessary. She paused for a moment. But we do not want to destroy you, Admiral, she said. We never wanted this war in the first place, and we would much prefer to end it without firing a single shot. Zethmora stared at the human woman on the screen. 6 months ago, she had looked at this species and seen nothing but easy prey. Now she was looking at something she did not understand at all. Something that had accomplished the absolutely impossible through sheer determination and desperate innovation. Something that had united 8 billion individuals into a single unstoppable force of creation. And she was beginning to realize that the hegemony had made a terrible, terrible mistake. What exactly do you want from us? Zethmora asked. We want to talk, Tanaka said, as equals this time. Zethmora looked at her fleet, at the 16 million soldiers who had come here expecting an easy conquest. Then she looked at the readings from the human defenses. And for the first time in her very long life, she genuinely did not know what to do next. Admiral Zethmora stared at the tactical display for a very long moment, carefully weighing all her options. She could retreat from this system, but that would mean admitting defeat without firing a single shot. And no hegemony commander in 12,000 years of history had ever done such a shameful thing. She could negotiate with the humans, but the Conclave had given her no authority to make deals with a species that had been marked for conquest. Or she could order an attack and hope that the human claims about their capabilities were greatly exaggerated. In the end, she chose the only option that her training and her pride would allow her to choose. All ships, she commanded with authority, prepare for immediate combat operations. Her officers exchanged very nervous glances with each other, but they obeyed her orders without question. Across the vast fleet, weapon systems powered up to full capacity, targeting computers locked onto the human structures, and soldiers prepared for boarding actions that would never actually come. Secretary General Tanaka watched all this activity on her displays with something that looked like sadness. Admiral, I strongly urge you to reconsider this course of action, she said. The hegemony does not retreat from battle, Zethmora replied firmly. We have conquered 37 species before you, and we will conquer you as well. Very well, Tanaka said quietly. Then we will have to demonstrate exactly what you are facing. She nodded to someone off-screen, and suddenly every single display on the flagship flickered at once. A new face appeared on the main screen, a young human male in a simple uniform, with dark hair and remarkably calm eyes. Admiral Zethmora, he said politely. My name is Lieutenant Commander David Chun, and I will be handling the demonstration for you. What demonstration are you talking about? Zethmora demanded. The one that will hopefully prevent any further bloodshed today, Chun replied. He pressed a control on his console. I have just activated what we call a momentum lock, he explained in a matter-of-fact tone. Every single ship in your entire fleet is now completely unable to move. Zethmora turned immediately to her navigation officer. Full thrust on all engines now. she ordered. The officer worked his controls frantically for several seconds. "Admiral, the engines are responding normally, but we are not moving at all," he reported with fear in his voice. "It is as if we are completely frozen in place." "That is exactly what is happening to you," Chung confirmed. "Your ships still have power, and your life support systems still work perfectly. But you cannot move forward or backward or in any direction whatsoever. Release us immediately," Zethmara commanded. "Not just yet," Chun said calmly. "First, you need to see the demonstration." He gestured, and the tactical display zoomed in on a section of the fleet. "You launched several planet-killer missiles the moment you detected our defenses," Chun said. 47 of them to be precise, and each one of those missiles is capable of devastating an entire world. Zethmara nodded curtly. "They are standard weapons in any hegemony invasion fleet," she said. "I am well aware of that," Chun replied. "Those missiles are currently frozen in space along with your ships, but I want to show you exactly what we can do with them." He pressed another control on his console. One of the missiles on the tactical display simply vanished from existence. That missile is now in orbit around a black hole approximately 6,000 light-years away from here, Chun said in the same calm voice. "We can do this to any object, at any time, without any warning whatsoever." Zethmara felt her blood go ice-cold in her veins. Instantaneous transportation across 6,000 light-years was absolutely not supposed to be possible. The best hegemony technology could move matter across a few dozen light-years at most, and even that required enormous amounts of energy and very careful preparation. "You must be bluffing," she said, but her voice wavered noticeably. "I am not bluffing at all," Chun replied. "Would you like another demonstration of our capabilities?" Before she could even answer, a human ship appeared right next to the flagship. It had not flown there through normal space. It had not emerged from hyperspace in any detectable way. One moment it was simply not there, and the very next moment it was hovering right beside them. The ship was small, barely larger than a shuttle, but the energy readings coming from it were completely off every scale the sensors possessed. "I am now approximately 50 meters from your bridge," Chun said. "I did not cross the space between my previous position and this one. Admiral, I simply stepped from there to here instantly." Zethmara stared at the tiny vessel through her bridge window with growing horror. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "We want peace," Chun said. "We want your fleet to leave our system and never return. And we want the hegemony to officially recognize humanity as an independent species with the absolute right to exist. The Conclave will never agree to such terms. Then the Conclave will have to deal with the consequences of their refusal," Chun said. He pulled up a new display showing a star map of all hegemony space. "We have already sent probes to your core worlds," he explained. "Small devices, no larger than a single grain of sand, but each one is capable of transmitting everything it observes." Red dots appeared on the map, dozens of them scattered throughout hegemony territory. "We know exactly where your shipyards are located," Chun continued. "We know where your leaders live. We know where your weapons are manufactured and where your armies are trained." "You are threatening the hegemony directly," Zethmara said. "No, Admiral, I am simply informing you of the situation," Chun replied. "We do not want war with you, but if war is forced upon us, we will absolutely not fight it on your terms." He leaned forward with intensity. "We will not wait passively for your fleets to arrive at our borders," he said. "We will not defend our territory and simply hope for the best. Because we have learned something very important about ourselves in the last 6 months." "And what exactly is that?" "That we are very, very good at destruction when we need to be," Chun said. "We spend most of our history fighting each other, and we became extremely creative about finding ways to kill. So, if the hegemony truly wants a war with us, we will certainly give you one. He paused for a moment. But it will not be the war you expect, he added. It will not be a long campaign of conquest and subjugation, because we will not give you the time for such things. What exactly will you do to us? We will end it, Chun said simply, quickly and completely, in whatever way is necessary to ensure our survival as a species. A very long silence stretched between them. Admiral Zethmora looked at her officers and saw their frightened faces. She looked at the tactical display and saw her entire fleet frozen in space by technology that should not exist. And she thought carefully about what Chun had said. The humans did not want to destroy the hegemony. They wanted to live in peace. But if peace was not possible, they were fully prepared to do absolutely whatever was necessary. And something in Chun's calm voice told her that he was not exaggerating even slightly. If I were to contact the Conclave, Zethmora said slowly, and recommend that they accept your terms, what guarantee do we have that you will honor your word? You have no guarantee at all, Chun admitted honestly. Just as we have no guarantee that you will honor yours. But that is the nature of trust, Admiral, and someone has to go first. He smiled slightly. We are willing to be the ones who go first, he said. We will release your fleet. We will allow you to leave our system. And we will not pursue you, but in exchange, we expect the hegemony to leave us alone forever. And if the Conclave refuses your terms, then we will have to convince them in other ways, Chun said. Ways that I suspect neither of us would prefer. Zethmora considered this very carefully. The hegemony had built its entire empire on strength, on the absolute certainty that no species could ever match their power. But looking at the frozen fleet around her, looking at the impossible technology that the humans had developed in just a few months, she knew that this certainty had always been an illusion. The galaxy was far larger than the hegemony had ever realized. And humanity was something completely new. A species that absolutely refused to accept defeat. A species that grew stronger when placed under pressure. A species that had looked at extinction and simply said no. Very well, Zethmora said finally. I will contact the Conclave and recommend that they accept your terms for peace. Thank you very much, Admiral, Chun said. I am not doing this for you, Zethmora replied. I am doing this because I have 16 million soldiers in this fleet, and I do not want them to die for nothing. She straightened herself in her command chair. Release my ships now, she said. I will take your message to the Conclave. Chun nodded and pressed a control on his console. The momentum lock released instantly, and across the fleet, ships suddenly found themselves able to move again. Safe travels, Admiral, Chun said. We hope to hear good news from you very soon. His transmission ended, and his tiny ship vanished just as suddenly as it had appeared. Zethmora stood alone on her bridge, surrounded by officers who looked just as shaken as she felt. Set course for hegemony space immediately, she ordered quietly. Admiral? Her navigation officer asked with confusion. We are actually retreating? We are reporting. Zethmora, correct asterisk, and now that they had seen what they could truly do when united, they would never forget it. The war lasted only 11 hours. That was how long it took for Admiral Zethmora to reach the Conclave, deliver her report, and convince the High Counselors that their empire was facing something it had never faced before in 12,000 years. Some of them believed her immediately. They had seen the tactical data with their own eyes, the readings from the human structures, the evidence of technologies that should have been completely impossible. Others absolutely refused to accept what she was telling them. High Counselor Methrix, the eldest and most powerful member of the Conclave, insisted that the Admiral had been deceived by clever human tricks. They are a primitive species with only 3 centuries of space travel, he declared angrily. They simply cannot have developed such capabilities in just 6 months. I saw it with my own eyes, Counselor, Zethmora replied firmly. My entire fleet was frozen in space by a technology we do not understand at all. Then you were foolish enough to be caught in some kind of trap, Methrix said dismissively. We should send a larger fleet, one large enough to overwhelm any possible defense. With the greatest respect, Counselor, I do not believe a larger fleet would make any difference, Zethmora said. Then we will send 10 fleets at once, Methrix insisted stubbornly. We will send every ship in the hegemony, if that is what it takes to crush them. It was at exactly that moment that Secretary General Tanaka's face appeared on every screen in the chamber. She was not supposed to be able to access hegemony communications. She was definitely not supposed to be able to project her image into the most secure room in the entire empire. But there she was, looking at the assembled counselors with those calm human eyes. Forgive the interruption, she said politely, but I thought you should know that we have been listening to your entire debate. Methrix recoiled in shock at her sudden appearance. How is this even possible? He demanded. The probes we mentioned to Admiral Zethmora, Tanaka explained. We have thousands of them scattered throughout your territory, and they have been very helpful in keeping us informed of your activities. This is an outrageous invasion of our sovereignty. Methrix sputtered. You invaded our sovereignty when you threatened to enslave or destroy our entire species. Tanaka replied calmly. We are simply protecting ourselves from future aggression. She paused for a moment. I understand that some of you still doubt our capabilities. She continued. Perhaps a demonstration would help convince you. Without any warning whatsoever, one of the massive pillars that supported the conclave chamber simply vanished. It disappeared completely, leaving nothing but empty space where it had stood for thousands of years. The counselors scrambled away from the gap in terror, their various limbs and tentacles flailing in absolute panic. That pillar is now in orbit around your sun, Tanaka said calmly. I can bring it back if you would like, or I can remove more pillars. The choice is entirely yours. Methrix's face had gone completely pale. What do you want from us? He asked. I want exactly what I wanted from the very beginning, Tanaka said. Peace between our peoples, official recognition of our independence, and a promise that the hegemony will leave humanity alone forever. And if we refuse to accept these terms, then I will remove every structure on this planet, Tanaka said, her voice still perfectly calm. Then I will move on to your shipyards, your military bases, and your population centers, and I will remove them as well. You would kill billions of innocent people. Methrix said. I would very much rather not, Tanaka admitted. But you must understand something. Counselor, when your ambassador came to Earth, he told us that refusing your ultimatum would result in the death of 90% of our population. She leaned forward with intensity. 8 billion people live on Earth, she said. 90% of 8 billion is 7,200,000,000 people. And you threatened to kill every single one of them if we did not submit to slavery. Her voice hardened noticeably. We took that threat extremely seriously, she said. We built defenses that could protect us from anything you might throw at us. And yes, those same defenses can also be used offensively. But we have absolutely no desire to use them that way. She spread her hands in a gesture of openness. All we want is to be left alone to live in peace, she said. Is that really too much to ask from you? The conclave chamber was completely silent. The counselors looked at each other with fear and uncertainty. They looked at the gap where the ancient pillar had been. They looked at the woman on the screen who held the fate of their entire empire in her hands. It was Admiral Zethmora who finally spoke first. I recommend that we accept the human terms immediately, she said. We simply cannot win this war, not as things currently stand. The hegemony does not surrender to anyone, Methrix said, but his voice had lost all of its earlier conviction. This is not surrender, Zethmora replied. This is wisdom, because the humans are not asking for our destruction. They are simply asking for peace. She turned to face the other counselors directly. "We have ruled this region of the galaxy for 12,000 years," she said. "In that time, we have grown complacent. We stopped innovating, we stopped adapting, and we assumed that our power would last forever." She gestured toward Tanaka's image on the screen. "The humans have shown us that we were completely wrong," she said. "They have accomplished in 6 months what we failed to accomplish in 12 millennia. And they did it because they had no other choice, because we gave them no alternative." She lowered her head respectfully. "We should learn from this experience," she said. "We should recognize that the galaxy is much larger than we ever thought, and that other species may have potential that we cannot predict or understand." A very long silence followed her words. Then, one by one, the counselors began to signal their agreement with her recommendation. Even Methrix, after a long and painful hesitation, added his vote to the rest. "Very well," he said finally. "We accept your terms, Secretary General." Tanaka nodded graciously. "Thank you, Counselor," she said. "I know this was not an easy decision for you to make." "It was not easy at all," Methrix agreed. "But perhaps that is exactly the point." The peace treaty was signed 3 days later aboard the hollowed-out moon that the humans had named Bastion. Representatives from every single hegemony species attended the ceremony. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of worlds, all gathered together in a chamber that had been carved from lunar rock. Secretary General Tanaka addressed them all. "We did not seek this conflict," she said. "When your scouts found us, we were barely beginning to explore our own solar system, and we dreamed of meeting other intelligent species, of learning from them and sharing what we knew." She looked around the chamber at all the alien faces. "Instead, we were given an ultimatum," she continued. "Submit or die. Those were the only choices we were offered, so we chose a third option that you did not expect." She smiled slightly. "We chose to change ourselves," she said. "In 6 months, humanity transformed itself in ways that would normally take many centuries, because we had absolutely no choice, because the alternative was complete extinction." She paused for a moment. "We do not want your empire," she said firmly. "We do not want revenge for the threat you made against us. And we do not want to rule the galaxy or subjugate other species the way you have done for so long." Her voice grew stronger and more confident. "We want what we have always wanted," she said. "To survive, to explore, to learn, and to find others who might become friends rather than masters." She extended her hand toward Ambassador Kefvarin, who stood at the front of the hegemony delegation. "The galaxy expected a prolonged war between us," she said. "We ended it almost instantly. Not because we are monsters, but because we had to. Because we absolutely refused to let our children grow up as slaves." She waited patiently. Kefvarin looked at her extended hand for a very long moment. He remembered the day he had delivered the ultimatum. The absolute certainty he had felt that humanity would submit like all the others before them. He had been so completely wrong about so many things. But perhaps he could be right about this one thing. He stepped forward and took her hand in his. "On behalf of the hegemony of aligned worlds," he said formally, "I accept your offer of peace and friendship." The chamber erupted in a mixture of sounds. Clicks and whistles and rumbles and cries from dozens of different species. Some were sounds of profound relief. Some were sounds of lingering fear. And some, Kefvarin thought with wonder, were sounds of genuine hope. In the years that followed, historians would debate endlessly about how humanity had accomplished what they did. Some credited their desperate circumstances, their willingness to take risks that more cautious species would never accept. Others pointed to their unique neurology, their pattern recognition abilities that had evolved on a predator-rich world. A few suggested that they had simply been incredibly lucky, stumbling onto breakthrough physics at exactly the right moment. But the humans who had actually lived through those 6 months knew the real truth. They had always been capable of achieving the impossible. Every war in their history, every crisis, every moment of collective danger had proven that humans could accomplish incredible things when they worked together. They had simply never been frightened enough to actually try. Until now.